So, I finally did it. I read Delay, Deny, Defend, the book that allegedly inspired the actions of one Luigi Mangione, who, on the morning of December 4th, 2024, unalived the CEO of United Healthcare, Brian Thompson. It was revealed by authorities shortly after the incident that written on the casings were the words deny, defend, and depose. These words were quickly tied to a book with a similar title of Delay, Deny, Defend. So this book was published in 2010 and written by a law professor, J.M. Freeman. And now, almost 15 years after its publication, people are turning to this book with questions. Now, the connection between Luigi Mangione and this book is still alleged at this point, but I'm sure many of us would like to know, what is this book exactly about, and how could it have possibly influenced someone like Luigi Mangione to do what he did? Well, that is exactly what I'm examining in this video today. In this video, I will be breaking down everything that they talk about in this book and summarizing much of its contents. Now, the purpose is to make this information as accessible to people as possible. Right now, there's a lot of fear and ambiguity when it comes to this book, so I thought it best to get everything out in the open. Explain it all as I understand it so that you can draw your own conclusions. So without further ado, hello, welcome back. Today we will be discussing everything there is to know about Delay, Deny, Defend. So of course, with the nature of this video and the events that surround this book, I do have to give some disclaimers. First and foremost, I do not condone violence of any kind. This video is not meant to encourage any violence. I am simply going over the book based on its own merits and independent of any outside events. I will also give another disclaimer that this book was written in 2010. That's almost 15 years ago. The landscape has changed dramatically since then. So some of the more specific examples might not still hold up today, but I think a lot of the foundations and a lot of the not so nice business practices, we'll say, are still active. Now, of course, I do have my own biases, my own opinions when it comes to not only this book, but some of the things that happened outside of its publication. But the only thing I will say in that regard is that, I loved playing Nintendo games growing up, and I'm the youngest sibling in my family, so let's just say Luigi has always been my main. So now I'm going to go into a general overview before I start getting into the nitty-gritty of each chapter. So first and foremost, you might be surprised to know, but Delay, Deny, Defend mainly focuses on auto and homeowners insurance, not health insurance. The title is in reference to a business strategy that was adopted by both industries and is meant to outline the disadvantages to the policyholders, where these insurance companies will delay payment for as long as possible, deny claims outright, and defend themselves in any form of litigation. The author does give a very big disclaimer that he is not anti-insurance, instead stating that insurance is essential to our society and our economy. His purpose in writing this book is mainly to point out the flaws within the industry and how they can be remedied, not only by putting power in the hands of policyholders, but also rallying for change at the government level. So the first chapter examines how insurance actually works. He talks a lot about the early examples of insurance with Mariners Insurance, and even during the colonial days with Benjamin Franklin, who was involved in the creation of the Philadelphia Contributionship for the insurance of house from loss by fire in 1752. So by no means is insurance a new concept. The way that it's supposed to work is that people will pool their money together by paying premiums to this company that will then agree to hold on to that money and pay it out to the policyholders, aka the people that put their money into that pool to begin with, in the event that any loss should occur. In my example with Benjamin Franklin, that specific contributionship was to prevent against house fires. Now, in the early examples, in exchange for holding onto this money, those companies then also got an additional payment for the inconvenience of doing so. Now, as any good business, they want to make as much profit as possible. And in order for an insurance company to profit, they have to pay out less in claims than they take in premiums. Now, what you may not know about modern day insurance companies is that they actually function very similarly to banks. Let's say, for this example, you have a policy with small state. You pay them $100 every month to insure your car. They don't just take that $100 and hold on to it for you. It's not a savings account. They take that money and they invest it. Now, the author does note that these investments are mostly in bonds and a very small percentage is in the stock market, but they are actively taking the money that you pay them for your insurance and investing it so that they can get a profit. This is exactly what banks do. The difference being that the banks are insured by the FDIC. The FDIC ensures that if you, for whatever reason, decide, I would like to take out all of my money from this bank, they have to give it to you. You will never get any less than what you put in the bank. This security does not apply to your insurance. They are not required to give you back 100% of your initial investment. You taking out your money from the insurance company is essentially when you file a claim and they pay you out based on your policy. They're not required to pay you out completely based on what you paid in. This is the crucial difference between a bank and an insurance company. And I'll go a little more in depth into this payout process in just a moment. But overall, the way that insurance is supposed to work, the way that it was designed to work, is very much on a moral basis. You're not paying for something physical like when you go to the store and buy groceries or a TV or whatever. This is not a commercial good that you can pull up off the shelf. You're buying something that is mostly intangible, and that is a feeling of security. The problem that so many people face when talking to their insurance companies, when filing their claims, is determining what exactly their policy covers. You as a policyholder are entitled to certain benefits when dealing with your insurance company. Generally speaking, they should always side with you. They should always work in your favor as opposed to against you. They should work in good faith, which is a more legal term, meaning that they don't try to do anything kind of sneaky or under the table to try and resolve your claim. And of course, that you are entitled to due process, meaning that they file your claim with speed, efficiency, and a proper investigation. This is the bare minimum. This is the contract that they agreed to when you buy their policy. Because again, you're buying something intangible. It's security. If you go to the store and buy headphones, for example, and decide, I don't really like these, you can return them for another pair. You can look at reviews on the internet from other people and say, oh, there's a lot of 1 stars on this one brand. I'm just going to buy a different one. That's not the case with insurance. You buy the policy and you only find out if it works or not when you have to use it. And by that time, if unfortunately you're not satisfied with your service, you can't then change policies in that moment to make sure that you get better coverage. If you get a less than desirable outcome from your insurance company, then you're kind of out of luck. Now let's get into all the ways that insurance doesn't work. So of course, with so many insurance companies, we've all seen some of the more iconic ads. We have Date Farm liking themselves to being your good neighbor. We have Small State telling you that you're in good hands. And so many other slogans that all focus on this special relationship between the policyholder and the company. And as the author of this book says, they're making a promise to you. But as we've seen from so many examples, not only in this book, but anecdotally, this promise is more often than not broken over and over again. And they break their promises in order to prioritize profit. So in this chapter, the author goes a little bit more in depth into this concept of delay, deny, and defend. So first, with delay. This is when your insurance company delays their payment on your claim. And the reason they do this is so that they can hold on to your money for as long as possible and continue to collect on their investment. That being that your money is still technically invested in wherever they have it, and they're still getting profits on it. So they delay your payment to make sure that they hold on to it for as long as humanly possible and squeeze out every last drop of possible money that they can gain on it. Another way that they're able to delay payment is by requesting documents that they don't realistically need. Sometimes they might require you to get examined by a doctor of their choosing. This is to make sure that your injuries are as serious as you claim them to be. Just one way that they are trying to avoid insurance fraud, which is a whole other can of worms that I will get into later. In another testimonial in this book, Theodore Price was involved in an auto accident. This accident happened on August 30th of 1995. So first, his insurance company asked for some of the more obvious documentation, medical records, things that tied directly to the accident. Then they wanted information about his workers' compensation claim. Then he needed to get examined by a doctor of their choosing. Then they required the following documentation, including medical reports, employment records, a workers' compensation lien letter, and a medical authorization form. This was requested from his insurance company in 2001. That's 6 years after the accident took place. Then they needed the original films from his MRI. Then they needed information on his employer's insurance policy. So after requesting all this information that was mostly unnecessary, he got fed up and consulted his attorney, to which they decided that they were going to file against their insurance company, to which they said, haha, you are past the statute of limitations to sue us. They went ahead with the suit anyway, claiming that his insurance company acted in bad faith when handling his claim, and eventually he was awarded his long-awaited money. And you might be asking yourself, Kristen, well, how long did it take for him to get paid out? Almost 10 years after the accident. Isn't that funny? Isn't that interesting? Now, the purpose of this delay tactic is to essentially put the victim, the policyholder, in a position of complete and utter desperation. Now, when you're filing a claim for something, you need that money right away, whether it's to pay your medical bills, rent a new car, buy a new car, and insurance companies know how desperate you are to get money. So they will delay payment until you get fed up and take whatever lowball offer they give you, or even worse, until you give up. You decide this is too much of a hassle, I'm just going to figure it out myself. And that is how they get the most profit out of policyholders. Now, this delay tactic then gives way into denial, where they deny either partial or your entire claim with them. By denying only a part of your claim, they then put you in a position where you're so desperate again that you'll accept whatever lowball offer they give you. Because, hey, something is better than nothing. And if they deny your entire claim, what realistically can you do? Are you in a position where you're able to hire a lawyer and then go after your insurance company? And the worst part is that the basis for so many of their denials aren't actually valid at all. Companies may choose to rely on unreasonable interpretations of a policy in order to get out of paying for a claim. For example, in auto accidents, more often than not, insurance companies will try to deny that any injury sustained was not caused by the accident and was pre-existing. Even if they have no basis for making that assumption, they'll deny the claim and then force you to prove that you broke your leg because it was crushed under a car and that you didn't show up like that. And again, the people that are making these determinations that, hey, that's a pre-existing injury and it wasn't something that was sustained in the accident, these are people that don't have medical degrees, that have no medical training to insinuate that they're making that assumption on any kind of logic. And a nice little fun fact that I learned while reading this book is that sometimes insurance companies will hire private investigators to follow you and make sure that you're actually injured and or disabled. They give an example in the book in which this private investigator infiltrated this woman's church to verify that her injuries were actually as severe as she said they were, and she was still presenting symptoms in her day-to-day life. Allegedly, hypothetically, I have to put that in there because again, this is all alleged. I don't actually know. This is just based on what the author is saying in this book. I cannot say that this is an accurate reflection on insurance companies as they exist now. For all intensive purposes, the companies I'm talking about are entirely fictional. They do not exist. Overall, what we take away from this chapter is that more often than not, insurance companies don't treat you like a policyholder. They treat you like a suspect. The insurance company takes the position that if you're filing a claim, they have every right to suspect you of fraud, meaning that at every turn, they have every right to request documentation from you, to request that you prove to them over and over again that you deserve the money that you are entitled to in your policy, which I don't want to go super into again because there's a whole chapter on it, but avoiding fraud is a good thing. That's generally what you want. But in these examples, these people were just everyday citizens. They were in an accident, they filed a claim, and they did what they were supposed to do. And yet their insurance companies did not work in their favor. And in all these examples, they sued their companies for bad faith in handling their claims and then got additional payouts because they were found guilty. Now, another problem with the insurance companies and how they get away with delay, deny, defend is that so many people don't understand just how widespread it actually is. Delay, deny, defend is not just a catchy title. It's their business model. It's working as it was designed to, which puts policyholders at a disadvantage. The problem is people don't understand this fact, and any proof that they are acting in bad faith and that this is their model is constantly covered up. In this chapter, there are so many examples of people that were able to take their insurance companies to court and prove that they were acting in bad faith. What these insurance companies will then do, they'll either settle these cases outside of court with the contingency that any documents that were found in discovery cannot be released to the public, or the courts will come to a decision and force these insurance companies to pay their policyholder. But then the insurance company will tell the courts, okay, fine, but you have to put a gag order on these people. They can't talk about the documents they found that prove that we acted in bad faith and that we do this systematically. So when you hear cases like this, you might think, oh, sure, maybe once in a while things like this happen, but it's not a reflection on the industry as a whole, is it? Oh, you poor, sweet, innocent soul. That's how it was designed to work. Which leads us into chapter 3, the origins of delay, deny, defend. Now, this goes more into the historical presence of this business model and talks a lot about the role that the government has played in trying to regulate insurance companies. Again, I won't go into a ton of detail on this chapter specifically, just because so much of it is also reiterated in other chapters. I'll just say that some of the stuff they talk about include moral hazard, which again plays into the inherent distrust that insurance companies have in their policyholders, meaning that they think to a certain degree that you as a policyholder will not prevent risk if you know that you're insured. They expect you to do anything and everything possible to prevent yourself from getting into an accident and needing to use your insurance. Now, going into my own personal opinion just a little bit, I think that that is not wrong. I don't think that they shouldn't expect us to avoid risk to a certain degree, but I think that should go both ways. Let's say your insurance company doesn't want to pay out too much money in auto insurance policies. They figure out, we pay a lot of money specifically in fender benders. Why don't we invest more money in the auto industry to make sure that they have things like motion sensors? You know, the things that will stop a car before it makes impact if you're not paying attention. So they invest their money in that. Now we have cars that will automatically stop for you, which is a net positive for the policyholder and the insurance company. They don't pay out as much in these little fender benders, and you don't get into fender benders. You see how those things go in tandem? Overall, the chapter just kind of talks about the bubble that the insurance industry is kind of in, where they go through a cycle of selling a lot of policies at a low price and then selling fewer policies at a higher price. You know, up and down, scarcity, economics, whatever. And apparently, the insurance industry and Major League Baseball are the only two industries that are not impacted by antitrust laws, meaning that, nothing prevents them from having a monopoly. Oh my God, monopoly. What is that reminding me of? That's like bringing back some memories of something, but I can't put my finger on it. Oh well, I lost it. I don't know. Now, Chapter 4, and the most damning chapter of them all, talks about one company's involvement that probably single-handedly changed insurance forever in the worst way possible. We're talking about McKinsey Company. Now, if you don't know, they're a consulting firm. They've worked with a lot of big name brands, including Coca-Cola, even working with the federal government. So in the 1990s, in this hypothetical world, like separate timeline that is not our timeline, so it doesn't technically exist, let's say this insurance company, small state, hired McKinsey Company to make them even more money. McKinsey Company then produced this slideshow, this document, if you will, that worked to completely change the claims process by taking the claims department and turning it into the main source of profit for insurance companies. Now, the McKinsey documents have been cited in a multitude of court cases against insurance companies, and over again, they've refused to release these documents. Now, eventually, they were released, but before that happened, they tried to claim that whatever was in those documents was a trade secret. Now, famously, and honestly, in the most icon of icon behavior, a Kentucky judge said, "The information sought does not rise to the level of the Colonel's secret recipe." You know, that blend of 11 herbs and spices, they got that on lockdown. That is nowhere near the McKinsey documents in the eyes of the law. So before McKinsey Company entered the scene, the adjuster was an art form. The people that held these positions would take claims. They were investigators, experts in their field, working to benefit the policyholder in every way possible, examining their policy and trying to get them the most bang for their buck. But now, in a post-McKinsey Company structure, the adjuster is nothing more than data entry. The main change was by standardizing the practice, making everything as computerized as possible, where adjusters essentially just have to plug in information and choose from drop-downs. And you might think that this is progress. Now they're not just handwriting claims, sifting through all these documents. It's more efficient, right? But it takes away all their autonomy and all their discretion. Because when you talk human to human, you're able to grasp concepts that a computer just can't. A human is able to understand extenuating circumstances, and a computer cannot. Also, by standardizing the practice, they then force their current adjusters to work a very specific way. They have to adhere to certain standards, and there is a certain level of vigilance with management watching over their adjusters to make sure that they do not deviate from the formula. Some of the programs that they mention in this book that contribute to the standardization of insurance claims processes include Colossus and Xactimate. Now, those two programs have their own chapters. It's a whole other mess when we talk about this. But overall, the way that they can be summed up in this chapter is that they're not accurate and they only work to the benefit of the company. In this plan, McKinsey Company also implemented an incentive program where adjusters were rewarded if they closed out claims with very little or no payment at all. Now, the author is sure to mention that this is technically illegal, but they found some pretty sly ways of doing it, allegedly. According to statements from people that worked in the claims department, allegedly, one way that they may or may not get around it is by giving someone a company card. Adjusters sometimes have to travel out of state, go on sites to wherever they're needed or for whatever reason. And of course, because they're traveling for business, they're given a certain amount of money to spend on their flights, hotel, food, accommodations of any kind. And let's say this adjuster just finished closing out 10 different claims without payment to the policyholder. So they might give them a nice pat on the back, tell them, "Hey, you did a good job see your account details, you have an additional $50 to spend on food or beverage. They use the company cards to then fill them up with extra money based on any incentive they earn for closing out claims without payment. Or this other example that is totally not real and 100% alleged, management might give out gifts to its adjusters, but they make sure that these gifts are under $100 and are therefore not taxable, so then they don't technically have to report that they got it. But overall, what the book concludes is that these fictional companies that don't exist do anything and everything in their power to keep these incentives off any kind of document so that it can't be traced back to them, because it is technically illegal. They're not actually supposed to be doing incentives. But as McKinsey Company proved, this incentive program worked. It influenced adjusters' behavior. And it didn't even stop there. It also extended to lawyers. Insurance companies allegedly were policing the way that the lawyers that they hired to defend them in courts spend their money. They essentially said, okay, you have $4,000 to litigate. Use the money how you will not get paid more than this. Which then led to the iconic policing of office supplies. Like, no joke, in the book, they say that they limit these lawyers' ability to photocopy documents. The definition of penny pinching, allegedly. Sorry, I accidentally kind of combined chapter 4 and chapter 5. They really play off each other, so a lot of the same things just kind of lead into the other. My bad. Now, a perfect example of what the adjuster has been reduced to can be found in none other than the brilliant piece of media that is The Incredibles. That scene has to be the best depiction of what it means to be an adjuster now, especially when you have Mr. Incredible saying things like, "We're supposed to help people," and his boss, the upper management in an insurance company that is in no way a reflection of actual insurance companies, just alleged, he says, "We're supposed to help our people, starting with our stockholders, Bob." Truly a beautiful piece of media. I highly encourage you go back and watch it. Now, moving on to chapter 6 is where we talk more about missed claims. Now, I mentioned these a little bit earlier in the video, but missed stands for minor impact soft tissue claims. These are your fender benders when you get rear-ended, the kind of accidents that don't necessarily cause a lot of damage. And if you have any injuries, they're not super easy to detect on things like x-rays or MRIs. An interesting thing that I found in this chapter is that insurance companies try to deny whiplash, whiplash. They try to say that that doesn't exist, that it's a form of hysteria and it's not an actual condition. And that was going back even forever ago with Charles Dickens. Yeah, you know him? He was one of the first people to document symptoms of whiplash. Who would have thought? Not me. So when it comes to missed claims, you would think, a small payout. Insurance companies must be okay shelling out like $1,000 on a claim or a few $100. Surely it's not that big of a deal. Oh, it's a big deal to them, all right. They took the position that if anyone files a missed claim, they will do everything in their power to make sure they don't pay that money, investing more money than the actual claim is worth in order to dissuade people on a larger, long-term scale from filing those claims. First, and this is not just with missed claims, but all claims, they do everything and anything in their power, allegedly, to make sure that you don't seek legal representation. If you come in when you make your claim without representation, they will advise against it at every single turn, really portraying attorneys as vultures that just want a cut of your payout, when the reality is that when you come in with legal aid, you're more likely to get paid more than you would if you didn't have a lawyer. Now, whether it's an actual agent or on the company website itself, they won't bring up your right and your benefit to have a lawyer represent you. Instead, they bump up their customer service. They turn on that little charm to make you think that you're getting a fair deal. They'll respond to your claims quickly. They'll build that personal relationship. And you might be saying, well, that's not really bad. If they respond to my claim quickly and I get paid out, what's the problem here? The problem is that you might not be getting the money that you are rightfully owed under your policy. And this tactic is part of a greater plan to make sure that in the long term, that with bigger claims, let's say your entire house burns down, you still won't seek legal aid. And then when you don't have that representation, they can do whatever they want to you. Allegedly. And with missed claims in particularly, insurance companies are more likely to take these cases to litigation to force the policyholder to accept whatever they offer. Because let's say you got rear-ended, you file your claim, and the damage is worth $700. The insurance company will either downright deny your claim, or they'll take you to court. And then you tell yourself, well, I don't think I can afford $2,000 to hire a lawyer and go through months of litigation to prove that I deserve $700. I'll just cut my losses. They take this aggressive stance as a way to indirectly influence the way that policyholders file claims. They are not so politely suggesting that you don't want to try them when it comes to a missed claim. Again, because more often than not, the damage is very minor, and if you have any physical injuries, it'll be nearly impossible to prove you have them on things like scans or routine tests. And that's not even the worst of it, because sure, they could drag you to court, they could deny your claim outright, but the worst thing that they could do is accuse you of fraud. Missed claims are more likely to be sent to their private investigation unit, and they will essentially treat you like a criminal. Because as I'll get into a later chapter when we talk about fraud, they report those numbers to a national database, meaning that if you're flagged for fraud, any future claims that you make with an insurance company, even if you switch insurance companies, they can pull up that information. And even if you were cleared, it'll still show up and they can still flag any future claims you make for fraud. And that's just within the private insurance company. That's not even going into the fact that you could be reported to the actual authorities for your missed claim, all because you just wanted to fix your fender that cost like $500. I don't know how much fenders cost. The book provides one specific example in which someone brought their insurance company, again, let's just pull a random name, something like Small State, and said that they investigated her claim in bad faith, and she specifically had a missed claim. And apparently, the court found that Young had failed to prove that Small State's missed strategy was anything other than sound business and claim handling practices. The law, the court said, has not reached the point where it is wrong for an insurance company to make a profit, much less follow good business practices. All of these tactics that they employ with these, again, minor claims that require very little payout in comparison are all to make sure that you don't file these claims at all. And you might tell yourself, you know, I can go without $500. It's fine. I'll just figure it out. But imagine how many policyholders allegedly, again, hypothetically, have this same mindset. And then suddenly it's not just you that's not filing a claim for the right $500 that you are owed. It's you and millions of other policyholders. And that's how they make it seem like you're not losing out on much when they have everything to gain, hypothetically. Now, in chapter 7, we examine the idea that the insurance company is essentially setting their own rules when it comes to the policy claim game. This chapter specifically examines all the ways that insurance companies will try to deny your claim and all of the crazy reasons that they cite for doing so. Another way that they examine these, for all intents and purposes, valid claims is by using paper reviews. That means that the insurance company will go through all of your medical bills, see what was ordered for you, and determine whether or not it was actually medically necessary. And more often than not, as I already mentioned, the people that are doing these paper reviews are not doctors. And a big problem within the entire industry is that the people that they are referring to for these independent evaluations are more often than not biased to side with the insurance company. So overall, the only purpose of these reviews is to confirm whatever bias the insurance company already has. They've already determined whether or not they think your injury is valid or whether or not they're going to cover your claim. All they need is proof so that if you sue them, they can say, hey, we got a doctor to sign off on this. Or we got this independent company to sign off. They said they agreed with what we said. Hello, yes, this is a different day. I had to take a break, unfortunately, but we're going to get right back into this, so don't you worry. I don't remember where I left off, but essentially the problem with these doctors is that these insurance companies keep going back to the same people and thus take away their objectivity. Over time, what you'll get is a group of doctors that get most of their payments from insurance companies and therefore have a higher incentive to then side with those companies. And on top of that, we also have a computer program known as Colossus. Now, what Colossus does essentially is it takes in all these medical reports and it takes in the details of the claim to then make an estimate. It'll deliver the number in severity points to which then insurance companies can assign a dollar value to determine how much your claim is worth. The problem with Colossus and any kind of computer program that you run, as we're finding with AI, is that it only goes off of what information you feed it. They take previously closed claims and feed that information to Colossus. So it then can determine based on precedent how much it should be awarding in money. That's not necessarily a bad format. The problem is that we must then expect insurance companies to act in good faith and give Colossus all the information about claims that it can possibly get. Now, this book alleges that what insurance companies are doing is limiting the amount of claims and previously closed claims that they're feeding into Colossus, and specifically excluding any settlements where the payout was abnormally high, abnormal meaning they got paid fairly, or in cases where an arbitration panel then awarded additional payout. So the only information that Colossus can go off of is claims where people were lowballed or paid nothing at all. In another example in the book, they gathered a group of adjusters, again, the real people that are employed in this company, and gave them a number of claims and said, how much would you award these policyholders? They gathered that data, gave it to Colossus, and then told the program to give 20% less than what actual adjusters quoted. So they programmed Colossus to then systematically determine that any claims that are put through the system should get paid 20% less than what was determined by actual professionals. Now, the way that Colossus gets away with it is by first not assigning that dollar value, and then by explicitly stating that the role of Colossus is not to replace the adjuster, but more as like a supplementary device. So, in short, computers cannot replace people. And with the inherent morality that comes with insurance and keeping the promise to policyholders, you need that human touch. You need someone to come in and make a decision as opposed to relying on a computer program that is already biased against the policyholder. Now in chapter 8, we go into homeowners insurance, specifically the all risks policy, and how it doesn't actually mean all risks. Now, this chapter, the author specifically states that homeowners insurance is extraordinarily difficult to understand because that's by design. The contracts that are involved with a homeowner's policy typically have a lot of exceptions and subsections, subparagraphs, and things that make it inherently more confusing. In those instances, you rely on the insurance company, you rely on their employees to tell you everything about your coverage. Some policy exclusions might say something like, oh, we don't cover for water damage to your home unless it's caused by a sewer. But if the sewer leak was caused by any external forces, like a storm, tornado, or any kind of natural disaster, then it is not covered. So you, as the average citizen, might ask yourself, why is it so confusing? Why are there so many exceptions? Well, with homeowners insurance, as the author claims, insurance companies are especially hesitant to grant you coverage. And a lot of the sinister dealings that come with paying out homeowners policies is by telling half-truths to policyholders. For example, let's say you're in your home and suddenly a tornado hits. The world huffed and puffed and blew your house down, and now you need to call your homeowner's insurance to cash out your policy and put up new walls. You call your adjuster and they say, sorry, your policy doesn't cover wall collapse. You, frustrated and now having to pay, I don't know, $500,000 to fix your home, decide, whatever, I guess I have to hang up now. But what your adjuster didn't tell you was that because that was a result of wind damage, it actually is covered by your policy. Not telling you the full coverage of your policy is a prime example of how they deal in bad faith when handling your claim. And as I mentioned in the previous chapter, there's a similar issue with contractors. Your insurance company may send out experts and contractors to really see the full scope of the damage to your home. They'll go back to the same people knowing that they will give them a favorable outcome. And they have their own helpful computer program known as Xactimate, which if you thought that stood for an exact estimate, you're wrong. The way that this program works is very similar to Colossus, where adjusters have to input data based on their investigation for a claim. The problem, as I talked about earlier when discussing adjusters, is that over time, the adjuster is no longer an art form, and the person that holds that position is no longer an expert. So when they're doing their walkthrough of your house to really assess the damage, they might not fully understand what goes into a repair. So when they input into Xactimate what they think you need replaced, they might be feeding the program the wrong information. In my previous example, let's say your adjuster comes out to your house and examines the damage done to your walls. They come and they say, yeah, 2 of your walls are missing. We got to replace those. So they pull up their computer, go into Xactimate, and write 2 drywall replacements. What they fail to take into account is that you also need new wiring for those walls, repairs to the foundation because let's say in this example it really messed up deep down into your house, and even things you might not consider like painting those walls or insulation. I'm not even naming the full extent of what goes into a wall repair because I don't know. And it's even worse when you have the person that's controlling your payout assess damages when they're not experts. And that's nothing on the adjuster. That's not to say that they need to know everything that goes into contracting a house, but it's their responsibility to then call an expert. But getting that opinion more often than not results in a higher payout for policyholders. So can you imagine that they frequently do not call experts? Surprise, surprise. And a big problem with these insurance companies, allegedly, is that they're allowed to delay your payout. Again, back to my example. Let's say the insurance company does decide to pay out your claim. They say your claim is worth $100,000, but they only give you $90,000. That $90,000 is just to only pay for the literal materials to rebuild your walls. That $10,000 they will then keep until you actually hire someone to come fix your walls. They keep that percentage as like this is what the contractor will require in payment, so we will hold on to this until you actually get this work done. Now, this delay tactic, as we already talked about, is to make sure that they hold on to your money for as long as possible and continue to get payments once they invest it. But the other hope is that you forget about that extra $10,000 and then never claim it. And since we're talking about homeowners insurance, and since this book was published in 2010, let's talk about Hurricane Katrina. In 2005, we had one of the most devastating hurricanes in history. Now, in a lot of ways, Hurricane Katrina exemplified the complete failure of the systems in place. The levees that promised security to the surrounding areas failed completely. Then there was the failure of the government to properly dispense resources to the affected areas. And of course, the failure of private insurance. As documented throughout the book, private insurance doesn't typically do well in natural disasters. Again, they're not like banks. They're not insured by the FDIC. They take in money from policyholders, and the assumption is that they set aside enough to pay out claims. But in instances of natural disasters, when you have a lot of claims coming in at once, the guarantee that those all get paid out goes down. significantly. Companies received hundreds of thousands of insurance claims during Hurricane Katrina. So, oh no, boo-hoo, poor insurance companies. They have to actually pay out their policyholders and can't just keep hoarding profit. So the natural response of these companies was to try and put the blame on the government as much as possible to make sure that they were the ones that were actually paying for the damages instead of private insurance. And by they, I mean the taxpayers. Us. Now, there is a federal flood insurance program, so in a sense, taxpayers are already paying out these policies, but private companies were denying claims allegedly in bad faith in order to avoid paying out policies as much as possible. As I mentioned earlier, when you file a claim, you need that money immediately. And that could not be more true than with the victims of Hurricane Katrina. But what policyholders didn't know was that insurance companies were 2 steps ahead of them. And they wrote loopholes into their policy way before Hurricane Katrina ever hit. They purposefully, allegedly, wrote their policies in such a way that made people think they were covered when they actually weren't. The biggest way that they did this was in determining what was wind damage and what was water damage. Now, I don't know if this is still true. Again, this book was written in 2010, but the author claims that a lot of insurance policies do not cover water damage for homes. So insurance companies would deny claims on the basis that it was the flooding that caused the damage and not the violent winds upwards of, let me get the actual mileage, 174 mile per hour winds. Now, the courts responded to this by essentially saying, well, obviously, one thing caused more damage to the other. So, for example, if your house had its roof blown off because of the wind and rain then came pouring down and flooded your home, the courts said, well, the wind obviously caused the most damage. If it hadn't taken off the roof, you wouldn't have had that other damage. Thus, your insurance company does have to pay for it. But insurance companies had a backup plan, and this was in the form of concurrent clauses. Now, the wording on these clauses is intentionally, allegedly, very misleading and very hard to understand. The best way that I can describe this to you is essentially that if your house was damaged, in this case during Hurricane Katrina, you had to prove that any damage caused to your home was caused exclusively by wind. It couldn't be in combination of wind and water, but just wind alone. And if that sounds subjective, that's because it is. Insurance companies were then able to say, oh no, that damage wouldn't have happened if it was just the wind. It happened because there was wind and water. Therefore, we don't have to pay out your policy. And you might be saying to yourself, Kristen, that sounds really immoral and bad faith dealing. How could they have possibly gotten away with this? Well, they lobbied the government. Allegedly, these insurance companies in this hypothetical scenario, definitely not real, paid out judges to rule in their favor on concurrent clauses, which then allowed them to continue to deny coverage to, again, victims of Hurricane Katrina. This whole thing stinks of bad faith dealing. Not only were they lobbying judges, but they also took a very interesting PR approach, and that was by calling Hurricane Katrina a flood. And the reason they did that was because you needed to purchase separate flood insurance. Your normal all risks policy does not include coverage for floods. So by calling this, again, 174 mile per hour wind, category 5 hurricane, a flood, they were able to shift perspective to make it seem that they didn't have to pay out claims. And even worse, because it gets worse, some people came back to find that their homes were completely gone. All that was left was the slab of concrete that was their foundation. These were known as slab cases. And in these cases, insurance companies looked at the scene and said, well, we can't determine what caused this damage. So instead of just covering to replace the whole house, they decided we don't have to pay anything at all. And that's not a good business practice. That's not a fair practice, because as we already established, they're supposed to overall rule in your favor. In any areas of doubt, they're supposed to work in your benefit. They're not supposed to work against you. And their whole thing of like, oh, well, we need to know what actually caused the damage is so crazy because even their adjusters can't determine what caused the damage. Of course, because Hurricane Katrina was such a crisis, they had to deploy a lot more employees than they actually had. So they outsourced a lot of third-party companies and hired people that were wholly unqualified to be adjusters. Even worse than was already the norm. They hired the most random people, gave them a computer, a ladder, and said, good luck. So first, they weren't properly assessing damage and doing the full investigation, which you are entitled to. And then they wouldn't fully understand the policies and procedures that went along with their own job, which resulted in such gross error. And unfortunately, policyholders were the victims of these errors. These adjusters did not get any kind of expert opinion, and insurance companies dissuaded them from doing it, allegedly, because local contractors were biased and marking everything as wind damage because they knew the companies would have to pay out policies. Isn't that so funny? How it can work one way, but not the other. It's okay when it benefits the company, but not the policyholder. Over and over again, the American people were failed, not only by their private insurance, but by the government. Again, both entities that are supposed to protect and promise you security. Now, these companies have a lot of talk. They like to say that, us normal everyday citizens will take advantage of crises in order to file false claims and make money. And yet when they take advantage of these crises, of people losing their lives, their homes, everything they've ever known, and use that as an opportunity to squeeze out as much profit as possible, that's not a bad thing? How is it okay that these insurance companies reported profit in 2005 and 2006? And not just, a few $100,000, billions of dollars in profit, when we know that the only way that they're able to make that profit is by paying out less than they take in. They underpaid policyholders so grossly, allegedly, and did it on the taxpayer's dime. So, all the people that are like, oh, I don't want universal health care, like it's going to cost so much money. They're already costing you money. I kind of already went into it, but in this next chapter, we're talking all about fraud. This is also the chapter of how insurance companies have a very expensive marketing budget. And the way that they market themselves and what they choose to invest in is very telling of their business practices. Now, we all know insurance fraud. We all know that it happens. The thing is, allegedly, according to this book, insurance companies made it seem as though it was happening at a much higher rate than it actually was. Insurance companies estimated that policyholders lose out between $4 and $6 billion as a result of fraud. And then they say, sorry, that's why your premiums have to go up because greedy little miss over here decided to commit insurance fraud. And now we have to collectively punish all of you? Now, they have a vested interest in making fraud seem like a bigger issue than it actually is. And this is for a number of reasons. A big one is that so they can rationalize policing their policies, and for things like missed claims, they have a good reason to send them to a private investigation unit and flag them as a fraud alert for the rest of time. Now let's get this out of the way now. In a study of around 17,000 claims that were flagged for fraud, only 300 were found to need legal action. That's roughly 1%. Now here is the outline of their fraud PR plan. First, they go about making national databases in which any private insurance company can then report someone if they are suspected of fraud, where even if you move companies, anyone can look up that information and flag you for a potential fraud. Even if you were cleared, even if your claim was 100% valid, they then have rationale to further investigate your claim and delay your payment. Then they do some good old-fashioned fear-mongering, allegedly, to make the public think it's a bigger issue than it actually is. And finally, they work in legislation to make sure that anyone found guilty of fraud can be punished to the full extent of the law. That way, in any cases where there actually is fraud, they can turn it into a media circus. Make an example of that person essentially telling all of their policyholders, if you try this with us, this is what will happen to you. And one of the opinions in this book is that, well, if insurance companies just paid out their policies fairly, then cases of fraud would probably go down. I mean, of course, there are people that are going to exploit where they can. But for the most part, the people that are engaging in fraud are people that think they have to exaggerate their injuries to make sure that their policies actually get paid out. And this kind of soft fraud, I will call, is not uncommon. People talk about it all the time. I remember when I started driving, someone said on the internet that if you get into a car accident where someone hits you and you're not at fault, you should pee yourself to make sure that their insurance pays you more. Now, technically, under every definition by insurance companies, this is fraud, but this is seen as, I mean, depending on who you ask, socially acceptable to make sure that you actually get paid out properly for any pain and suffering and for your medical bills. Now, a prime example of how insurance companies have changed our laws is with the issue of arson. Now, this surprised me a lot when I read the book, but they were saying that arson was not a big issue before insurance companies intervened. With some helpful marketing and lobbying of our legislators, insurance companies put arson at the top of everyone's list as major crimes. They lobbied the FBI to put arson as a Class 1 felony, which they refused to do until the companies then lobbied the federal government and they forced the FBI to make it that Class 1 felony. Again, the reason that they did this was because any instance in which a house catches on fire, the insurance companies are looking for any way to deny that claim. And the best way that they can do it, especially after lobbying the government, is by claiming that it was fraud. Now, anytime a house catches on fire, the immediate assumption is that it was arson and insurance fraud. They even tried to spread propaganda in 2008 when the housing bubble collapsed that they might see more claims coming in of arson as people set their houses on fire to pay off their debts. And in case you're wondering, did this actually happen at the rate that they claimed? No. So insurance companies are lobbying the government to make more strict anti-fraud laws. And I mean, fighting against fraud is not inherently negative. The problem is that more often than not, based on that study I already talked about, people are wrongfully accused of fraud. But insurance companies covered themselves against that too, by lobbying the government to write into law that if you are falsely accused of fraud, you can't sue your insurance company. They can beat down on you with the full extent of the law, essentially put you in a position of guilty until proven innocent, but you can't even get mad at them for doing it. And as a result, the adjuster now becomes something of a warden, policing policyholders. As Sean Mooney, Senior Vice President of the Insurance Information Institute, put it, the insurance industry can acquire some of the fearful respect presently enjoyed by the Internal Revenue Service. There's no way we want to drag little old ladies in North Dakota off to jail. We just want to put the fear into them that we could. They're treating policyholders and, in often cases, victims as suspects. And the reason they get away with it is because they've shifted public perspective, making them think that fraud is a much bigger issue than it actually is. They can flag you for some of the most subjective things. For example, if you get into a car accident and your car is from 2003, they can say that you are a suspect of fraud because your car is old. And if you don't understand what that is, let me put it in layman's terms. They're criminalizing being poor. They say if you're poor and take out a claim with your insurance as you're entitled to, you're probably committing fraud. I don't know about you, but that doesn't sound like what a good neighbor would do. That doesn't sound like I'm in good hands. Over and over, I've talked about all the ways that insurance companies fail policyholders. We've talked all about delay, deny, defend. So now we're going to go into how you as the consumer can stop it. Now, this portion of the book is definitely not advocating for any massive change within the industry. First, the author implores people to read their policies and learn what they're actually entitled to, which is not bad. Obviously, you should be reading any contract you sign, but I don't necessarily like this chapter. I'm going into my opinion now, because the whole book goes into how the cards are stacked against us, that all these obstacles are manufactured, and it's essentially a case of David and Goliath. The author goes as far to say as buy the right policy and oftentimes buy extra packages so that you can get the one up on these insurance companies. And I would then ask the logical question, why should I have to buy claim denial insurance just to make sure I get what I'm entitled to? There's a lot of more practical tactics, things like making sure that you document everything, especially when you're in an auto accident. For your home, be sure to keep any receipts for the things you buy, especially if they're expensive. Be sure to hire experts so that they can't lowball you. And what the book didn't advocate for, and what I will advocate for, is make sure that you're represented. These insurance companies take advantage of your ignorance. They know that you don't know everything about insurance. They know you don't understand how the industry works, and that is by design. So yeah, hire experts, especially when it comes to your medical examinations, any contractors, things like that. But a lawyer does also constitute as an expert. Don't be afraid, especially when there are lawyers that won't get paid out unless you win. The biggest tool that you have against these insurance companies is knowledge. And you get that personally by reading your insurance policy and understanding your coverage, but also understanding how their system works, which hopefully you get by watching this video or by actually reading the book. In the next chapter, the author talks about how to stop delay, deny, defend, and this is more of that advocating for systematic change. The biggest one, and one that I very much agree with, is by making claims numbers known, meaning that you as the consumer should know how many claims a company is denying on a yearly basis. You should be able to access reviews, for lack of a better term, of these insurance companies and determine which one is the right one for you. Overall, they need to be more transparent, especially with telling you that you're entitled to have representation and that despite their lobbying, you're protected under the law. And of course, the best way that we can stop delay, deny, defend is by questioning our legislators. So many have been lobbied by these private insurance companies and paid out so that they can rule in their favor. These people are supposed to work for us. Insurance companies because we pay them money, and the government because we pay taxes. Anytime the government has tried to rule in favor of the consumer, they've, in no uncertain terms, been bullied by private insurance. And the only way that they keep getting bullied by them is because they let it happen. The problem is that regulation of private insurance companies is largely up to the individual states. And they want to keep it that way. Because if the federal government decides, hey, yeah, we need to control your prices, it'll be harder for them to fight it as opposed to maybe a few couple states. Because hey, even if a place like California decides you can't charge over this amount for your premiums, but I don't know, 20 other states say you can, it's better than nothing. There is a lot of corruption at play, not just within the private insurance, but in our own government. And sure, there's things that we as consumers can do to fight against it, but one thing is for certain, private insurance is broken. The system is stacked against us at every turn. McKinsey and Company, allegedly, with their documents and with their consulting of private insurance, has turned the business focus away from the policyholder and onto the stockholder. This book is mainly about home and auto insurance, but make no mistake, this does apply to healthcare. Everyone has a story about how their insurance failed them in some way, whether it's something minor or something massive. And unfortunately, I think what we're seeing is that it's not something that we can ignore anymore. It's not just a few bad apples. It's not just a few cases of injustice. These companies are functioning as they were designed to, which is to profit at every turn at the expense of the policyholder, at the expense of regular people that just want security, which is our basic human right. What I would say, in my opinion, is that we really have to understand that it is systematic. It is imbued into the very foundation of these companies. We need dramatic change to make sure that we are getting what we're owed. And unfortunately, I don't think that path will be easy. I mean, they're lobbying legislators. They're completely changing our laws. In a lot of ways, they've made themselves untouchable by making sure that we don't have the information to prosecute them. But that's why it's important to read books like this, to get educated and understand how the cards are stacked against you. Because once you understand it, then you can fight it. I highly encourage everyone to read this book. There were so many things that I just wasn't able to get into. There's a lot of extra details that are really great to read about. For the sake of time, because I already know that this video is going to be over an hour long, I just couldn't go into everything. If you can believe it, this was as condensed as I could get it. But with that being said, that is the end of the video. I hope that this was enlightening for you. I hope that you really took something from this video. Please let me know what you think in the comments. I really would like to get people's input. I've had a few experiences with insurance, but if you have your own stories, please feel free to let me know down in the comments below. Let me know, have you read this book? What do you think of the messaging? And I guess most of all, how do you think we should fix it? I have my own ideas, but I'm interested to hear what everyone else thinks. Again, just to cover my bases, I have to reiterate that this is all alleged. Technically, this book is nonfiction, but some of my additional commentary I cannot really say about the insurance companies. I don't know. For the sake of this video, everything is alleged, hypothetical. The companies I'm talking about are not real. These are in like a fantasy world that I just made up. Any relation to real life entities is purely coincidental. I don't know. Please be sure to like the video, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. It really helps support me and the channel. I guess that's it. I've been talking for 2 days straight. Hopefully this video does not get taken down. Everyone pray, cross their fingers, do whatever. Hopefully this lives on the internet. Thank you. Free Luigi! I'm talking about the Nintendo character, not the actual guy. I don't know.